Welcome to the 359. I'm Alfred Ng.
I'm Ben Fox Rubin.
The European Union hit Google with a record-breaking $5 billion fine over Android antitrust practices on Tuesday. The reasoning is that Google's got a stranglehold on the mobile phone market thanks to its agreements with phone makers like Samsung and LG. They're completely dependent on Android, and the agreements require them to have default apps like Google Search, the Google Play Store, Google Maps, Chrome, YouTube installed on there. The EU worries that Android further deepens Google's dominance with apps and its own services. I mean, if you think about it, Android is the most popular mobile OS out there, and these phones can't really exist without Android. And for them to do it, they have to have Google's apps. The EU argues that gives Google and Android a unfair advantage, and Google CEO Sundar Pichai said he would be fighting this. Do you think that Google really has a chance at appealing this, or do you think that this is like kind of an open and shut case?
They obviously have a chance in appealing it. It's a very complicated issue, and Sundar, I think, accurately referenced in his blog post today the idea that bundling of your services or your apps today is very different than it was 20 years ago. So the United States versus Microsoft, which looms large in this particular case, where Microsoft was bundling Windows with Internet Explorer and eventually had to settle that case with the United States government. That was an entirely different situation. The internet was still in its infancy, and it was really hard to download different types of web browsers like Internet Explorer or what was it? I think Opera,
Netscape was
Netscape
going on, yeah.
and Opera, those different guys. So it really depends whether regulators are going to see that as a big difference, that you could switch up your apps or your browsers much more easily these days.
Well, speaking of Google and its expanding power, my best friend, Rich Nieva, our Google Beat reporter, had a scoop yesterday reporting that the Nest CEO stepped down after a tough transition under Google. Nest rejoined Google 5 months ago, which originally was its own smart home company, and employees at Nest complained that their CEO was more of an operations manager than a leader, and they wanted somebody who had taken bigger risks with their products. They didn't want like more mediocre, just kind of like middle of the aisle kind of products from Nest. And I'm just curious, like, how much crazier are smart home gadgets from Google really going to get now, like under new leadership, I suppose?
That's a good question. Nest has really had a lot of stories written about it for a couple of years now, that they've had leadership problems and operational problems, haven't been coming out with enough products or the right products or innovating enough. Maybe this change will help them continue to move forward, but it seems like they're constantly in the process of shaking something up. So that seems like an issue.
I also forgot to mention his name during this introduction. It's Marwan Fawaz, and I think my bigger question is also, just they had a lot of problems with him, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I think you hit it off pretty well from Rich's story that they saw him more as like a nuts and bolts operations person, which maybe Nest needed at the time. But a lot of people were really probably hungry for the leadership and the vision of Tony Fadell that started the company and helped create the iPod and was a big part in developing the iPhone when he was at Apple. So he was like probably much more of a big thinker kind of guy.
And, finally, Amazon's 36-hour Prime Day is finally over. They were projected to make, like $3.4 billion from these, from like the day and a half of sales?
One estimate was that it was going to be $3.4 billion in sales, which is staggering considering that it's in the middle of July, well away from the holiday shopping season.
So how did they do? You have 3 seconds, by the way.
They hit all the numbers as expected. This is the third year where they hit a record, and more people joined Prime than any day in previous history. The company is growing so quickly, though, that a lot of these stats are probably going to get lapped eventually, or pretty soon, probably in the holiday shopping season anyway.
All right, only 20 seconds over, but that's it for us today. Thanks for listening, and check us out on CNET. I'm Alfred Ng.
I'm Ben Fox Rubin. Thanks for listening.
I said thanks for listening.
And with that, my rhythm is shot.
That's a great ending. You better keep that ending.
Thank you, everybody, as always, for joining us for the recording of the podcast.
I said thanks for listening.
We'll be taking your questions and comments now. Submit anything you want to know about Amazon or Nest or the guy with the most wacky Elmer Fudd name I have ever heard in the history of everything.
Marwan Fawaz?
Marwan Fawaz. Sorry, I shouldn't make fun of people with speech impediments, but
Yeah,
that
he
name
also
is
just
so
lost
fun to
his
say.
job, dude. Come on.
Yeah, not nice. What the hell? The other element that I wanted to mention about the Android thing is, Google is an enormously profitable company. They obviously can be able to afford these staggering fines. There was another fine from the EU last year related to Google's services that was like $2.7 billion. So the financial impact is one thing. The real question is the EU going to force Google to change its business practices and therefore create an opening for rivals? So that's something that I think people really should pay attention to in the future, as opposed to these fines, because the fines to a certain extent are limited, and it's something that, Google writes a giant check and, now they can move on with things.
Yeah, I don't think this is a fine that they're really going to just be like, oh, let's just write a check for it, though. Like,
I
$5 billion
agree.
is a lot of money.
I agree with you. They're definitely going to fight it. But if the EU decides to just focus on financial impact, it's not actually going to change anything. It's not going to change their business practice. I mean, like Windows Phone and BlackBerry, I don't think, well, they did have their fan bases, and seeing something like this kind of makes me wonder how would things have shaken out differently if Android had another major competitor that wasn't just iOS, because iOS is more of a premier or more of a premium product. It's only through Apple, and it doesn't have nearly as much market share. Yes. Okay. Thanks.
Let's take a question from Ericos. It's not really a question as much as a statement. They need a $1 trillion fine. That sounds kind of harsh
Why?
to me. I don't know. I don't know.
Because then it would actually
that does not
impact their
elaborate.
business.
What do they do to you?
How did they hurt you, Ericos? From Nasreen. Now that Nest is a proper Google Home team part, do you think Nest will announce new products at the next Pixel hardware event?
I think Google will announce new products that, that Nest will be like compatible with. I mean, after they had merged, there was that story that came out that they were working on a like a Google Home like enabled like thermostat kind of thing, where like you could talk to it as if it were a Google Home as well. And I think you can expect to see a lot more of that in, future Nest products. But I do think that they're trying to make this more like Google branded as opposed to like Nest.
Yeah.
That's just me, though. I don't know.
When it comes to hardware, I think that it's pretty difficult to make like a really quick pivot. So all these leadership changes can't possibly be good for the company. And they're not, I don't think that they're going to come out with something new in the immediate term, but the hope is to create a good foundation to have better stuff moving forward. That's what I would expect to see.
Next question coming in from Srinjoy. WhatsApp CEO stepping down over privacy issues. Now Nest CEO stepping down. Does this feel like a trend for companies bought by tech giants?
I mean, I would make the argument that those were two completely different cases, though.
True.
That being said, like when WhatsApp was bought, I mean, this guy is stepping down with like $1.3 billion. So I don't really.
A ton of money.
Yeah, I don't really see the parallel here for him. And yeah, for him, it was more of like a moral issue, whereas in this case, this guy was... So this guy, the Nest CEO, this is the second like Nest CEO, because the original founder had already stepped down after Google bought them. So this was somebody that was put in by Google.
Right.
And then...
And the Nest people didn't really like him.
Yeah.
And we're like, look, we don't like what he's doing.
Yeah.
We don't like what's going on here. We feel like we're coming out with mediocre products. Going back to what Srinjoy said, though, I think it's pretty obvious that like if you agree to sell your company,
you're probably not going to be there after.
You're either going to be one of those founders that's going to leave after your stock vests, or maybe you get ridden out, whatever. But like it is no longer your company. As much as there's the claim that like we're going to buy you, but it's going to stay independent.
Yeah.
I mean, like when the rubber meets the road, like they bought your company.
Yeah, I almost never see that scenario play out when like, I mean, they buy the company and then they stick around for the rest of like that company's like incarnation. I mean, it happened with like Instagram when they were bought. It happened with Oculus when Facebook bought them. WhatsApp now that we've seen. So yeah, I've never really seen them like stick around after they've been bought because they got
I'm sure there are
buttload
cases,
of money.
Yeah, I'm sure there are cases when the founders do stick around, but more often than not, founders do tend to be serial entrepreneurs that want to go and start something else, and that is generally what ends up happening. Like Andy Rubin is a good example of that too, where he's the godfather of Android. After Android ended up getting scooped up by Google, now he's off to doing Essential. So he's always up to new stuff too. So in a lot of ways, it's really good for tech industry and the economy that these really smart people end up recirculating and developing new stuff.
Serial entrepreneur. That sounds like such a skeevy corporate evil kind of, doesn't it though?
Sorry,
like cartoon
I mean,
bad guy.
It's a term that I've heard a lot, and it's a
Just launching and tanking
a breakfast
companies.
food. It's a breakfast food that I'm also working on with Alfred. So I hope people buy it.
It's the opposite of avocado toast.
Right. We're launching a Kickstarter later today. So look for that. It's basically
It'll be as useful as a child-sized submarine.
it's Captain Crunch, but with like tiny Elon Musk faces instead. So.
Here's a question from Timothy Dew asking, isn't that the OEM's problem of adding more browsers, not Google's issue?
The argument from the EU is that the OEMs are too beholden to Google and are required to preload a lot of Google services.
Yeah.
And that bundling creates an antitrust issue.
It's not that there's not enough browsers out there. It's that all these phones that are coming out, even though they're an OEM, they have to have Chrome on it or they have to have YouTube on it. And the argument is that like they shouldn't be allowed to do that.
Right. And even though you can very easily swap out apps, again, from the EU's perspective, it's the path of least resistance for customers. And if you've already got Chrome on your phone, you're probably just going to use that and not switch to Firefox or another competitor. Again, those are the EU's arguments, not mine, but that's kind of what their position was.
From And Da, inserts shut up and take my money meme for your breakfast Kickstarter. So Ben, you're off to a good start.
Oh, sweet. All right. That is great news.
I can't wait to sell and then be fired.
Here's another one from Ericos. A fine needs to be high enough to hurt you, which at this point seems kind of difficult for somebody like Google. If it's very low, then that stops someone like Google from just paying a fine every year and just changing their practices. Like how can they actually hurt Google and teach them a lesson? Like everything is a perpetual slap on the wrist when you're as big as Google or Facebook or Microsoft.
I would say $5 billion is not a slap on the wrist. That's like a hefty sum of money there. Even though like Google is worth as much as it is, like I'd argue $5 billion is a hell of a lot of money for them.
Yes. And on top of that, we still have to see if they are going to force them to change their business practices. It's possible that they do require them to open up Android but this is something that if Google appeals, it could drag on for a couple of years. It's really hard to say in these cases.
It's really interesting to me, though, that all these like different moves against the tech industry have all really been coming from the EU. Like it's not really the US government that's been dropping all these like different fines and regulations. I mean, there was like GDPR. Now, these fines. There was another set of fines that had come from a court in England that I wrote about a month or two ago, essentially about Gmail security stuff on iPhones. So it's
interesting point that you mentioned that. So I went to a Peter Thiel talk a couple months ago, and he directly mentioned this issue and said it's because the Europeans are jealous that they don't have any major tech companies on their continent. And so it's easier for them to like poke at these major multinational American companies than create their own stuff. It also, that's an interesting theory from Thiel. It also points to the fact that The EU does not own these companies. They are not on They're not on EU soil.
Yeah.
So it is to a certain extent easier for them to throw rocks at them.
Wouldn't it just be that like they wouldn't be allowed to be used in the EU, which is a big chunk of their use?
That would be a nightmare scenario for those companies, and I don't think we're really quite there yet. But that's an interesting point to mention.
Winding down on time, but let's take another great question from Srinjoy, who is always able to throw the slightest bit of shade at Apple in the most classy of ways. Will these pushbacks force Google to become more like Apple and start mass-producing Pixels for the vanilla stock experience and move far ahead of the Android competition within?
That's a good idea. I mean, like, it's a terrible idea, but a very interesting theory from Stringjoy. So Pixel at this point has a very, very low market share, I believe. But, I have a couple of friends that use it and like it a lot.
I would welcome that just because then that would mean cheaper phones for me. And like, I do like the Pixel a lot. I think like 3 of my friends, so 75% of my friends have Pixels and they love them.
Yeah, that's nice of you to say. I have an Android, like a Samsung phone, so I guess I'm the other 25%.
No, I said friends.
Oh, okay, yeah. I got it. Yeah, cool.
Mark Dibble thinks that Google should be fined a Google of dollars. I think that would put a significant dent.
This chat has really turned on Google.
Which,
by the way, we're on YouTube.
I love that everyone is just like, just find them some more, and like, there's no reasoning behind it. Like, there could be like privacy issues, there could be the antitrust issues, or just I don't like them. But it's just I just take more money away from them. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, it's. The other fine from last year for $2.7 billion was also really significant, and you wonder what exactly is going to change with this. What other ideas the EU has to fine them even more money?
I do think it is a silly request, though, where it's like, stop putting your own apps on your own operating system. That makes no sense to me.
I get that logic, but that being said, like the U.S. versus Microsoft was very directly related to this.
Yeah.
It had everything to do with creating an ecosystem with your software that bundled things, and it's super helpful and valuable for the company, but at the same time creates a platform where you basically force out rivals. And that's what the regulators are at least claiming is going on in this case.
Let's help clear up a detail for Anda. What about Safari on iPhones? That's similar to how Chrome is stock on Androids, or am I totally off base with this one?
Yeah, I mean, you're correct about that. And
plus Apple Maps. I mean, like, they have a ton
That's been the argument from Google, though, where they've been saying, like, you're ignoring the fact that, like, Apple does the exact same thing. But the argument from the EU is that, because Android phones are so much more popular than iOS is, that like
they have a dominant market position.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
I mean that's the basic argument here. Where like, yes, like it's also bundled on like iOS stuff, but I think they only have like a 30% share of like the.
I believe it's an 80-20% swap, where 80% of the market is controlled by Android and 20% by Apple.
Yeah.
It's also different because Apple not only controls the hardware but the software and the apps, like its own app, like suite of apps, whereas Android is offered for free to other phone manufacturers, which makes them dependent and beholden, according to the EU, to Google. So it's a slightly different relationship, obviously.
One more question from Nasreen. Google is reportedly going to launch their own fully fledged e-commerce service in India this coming October. Do you think they will do the same in the US too?
It's called Google Shopping. Google Shopping. They have it already. And
in India only?
No. In the U.S., it's Google Shopping, and Google Express. It used to be called Google Shopping Express, and now it's called Google Express. They partner with a bunch of like major retailers like Target and Walmart to ship stuff. Maybe they're doing something a little bit more like direct in India. I don't know anything about that. So
this is going to start in India in October.
Yeah, but like maybe this person can give us a little bit more information about the India service. Does this mean that like Google is going to create its own warehouses
Google
and have
Express
its own
Day?
Yeah, and Does this mean that they're going to have warehouses and like their own inventory and do their own shipping, kind of like Amazon? That would obviously be interesting because right now Google Express, like they just partner with major brands, like major retailers to kind of work as a middleman, you know? So like they're more of like a platform to like sell stuff from, I don't know, Adidas.
We got just enough time for a couple more questions. APEC asks, would customers actually download different browsers and set up phones? Having a phone without Google Apps would be kind of empty. Would normal people want to take the time to do that? I do. I would, personally.
Yeah, I think the majority of people, though, tend to stick with their default app when they can, just because I think it follows a theory of if it's not broke, why try to fix it? And if it comes already and there's no problems with you using Chrome, like you really just want something that works. Unless you want something like specific, like a specific feature that like Firefox might have or anything like that. Like most people really just want to browse. So like I prefer Chrome to Safari, but on my iPhone, like Safari works fine for me, and like there's nothing like specific that I can get with Chrome that like Safari doesn't provide. So I just leave it as Safari on my iPhone.
Another example for me personally is that anytime I get an iPhone, like a new one for like work or personal, I usually download Google Maps because I found Google Maps to be more useful for most years than Apple
That's
Maps.
the thing. Like unless it's like in like something that you prefer already and want to change to, like your example of Apple Maps and Google Maps, I'm sure lots of people do that. Or you know, if they're driving and they know that Google Maps isn't that great for driving, but Waze is. Like they'll download that and they'll go out.
Waze is owned by Google.
Yes, but it's still it's
No,
not it's not a default app that comes with your phone.
That's true.
Is my point. So like I think that's when somebody will go out of their way to download an app that's not default. But otherwise,
and a good example, like, so for instance, there are some rivals that are trying to do exactly what you're mentioning. So for instance, like Firefox is really trying to focus on privacy elements for its browser to try to get people to say like, oh, we don't want our data to get packaged and sold and us to be advertised to. So Firefox is trying to differentiate itself in the market for that. There's also a search engine called DuckDuckGo,
yes,
which like I don't use that much, but it's interesting that they're also trying to get a little bit more attention by being the anti-Google, doing a little bit more privacy in their search. So maybe that is going to function as a useful rival, but at this point, both of them, even Firefox, I would argue, are significantly niche compared to like Google services.
Let's take a couple more. From Chris Garner, why did Apple get rid of Google Maps?
What?
That was a while ago.
It was, but this is somewhat related.
Oh, it's like a default app.
I'm curious as to see if we think collectively we're heading towards this whole like default mentality. If you're going to start seeing phones become way more proprietary. I know you just mentioned some of the partnerships that are being brewed, but do you think overall we're going to start seeing more phones that are locked down to their own ecosystems, or are we going to hopefully see a little more ebb and fold in the industry?
All these major tech companies are really into creating ecosystems that you like live in constantly, whether it's mobile or smart home or desktop, laptop, whatever. And it does create a significant amount of convenience for customers. That's why it's helpful to like have only Apple products for certain people or only Google products for other folks. But so I don't think they're going to become more open because it's way more profitable for the companies to just get you to keep using their services and like only their services. So if anything, I think they're going to try to create more of a stranglehold and take up even more of your time. That's at least my expectation.
From Raheel, how much is Google's net worth?
We can Google that.
We can Google that for you. We can just.
What if Google like adjusted its like search results so it says like $80 bajillion?
So last I checked, Google was the third most valuable company in the world by like market cap, by like how much their stock trades at, and the market cap is currently $837 billion. So good for Google. The two highest companies, Apple is number 1 and Amazon is number 2. Microsoft is way up there too. I think Microsoft is number 4.
I thought Amazon overtook Apple.
No, not yet, but they could. They could, especially after all those amazing Prime Day sales. So
I never
yeah.
even got anything on Prime Day. We hope everybody had a positive Prime Day result
Or negative.
after
I
it
don't-
crashed.
It was definitely much more newsworthy than I had anticipated. I mean, like the glitches were fairly like surprising and much longer lasting than I
love
expected.
Amazon's
The nuance.
statements after, though, where it was just like, oh, we had a rough day. Ha ha ha. Don't ask us about how this happened, all right?
One more.
Pretty much it.
One more question from Ericos. At this point in time, smartphone software is primarily made by Apple or Google. Why do you think there haven't been any major new players? It's been more than 10 years now.
Because Apple's the best, baby. No, I don't know. They
Careful.
paid me to say that.
Great, thanks, Alfred. Now
Way
I have
to
to
go.
deal with that in the
You
chat.
just set us back like 5 years. What have you done?
I basically set everyone back to my age. So
Right.
I don't know why there hasn't been new competitors.
There's been efforts to do it. I mean, look, the point is that there have been competitors like BlackBerry and Windows Phone are two very good examples of that. And the market spoke and they decided that like those aren't as good and they didn't get enough developers to work on apps. Like it's hard to create a mobile platform and it basically was like a winner take most situation where there just ended up being a top two. It was really, really hard for a third one to get in there.
Think about how there aren't that many competitors in like the voice assistant market right now, even though there's like everyone is trying to come up with their own voice assistant, right? Like you've got Siri, you've got Alexa, you've got the Google Home Assistant, then you've got Samsung's own Bixby, and then you have got there's one that's like slipping my mind right now.
There's like
Cortana.
IBM, there's Cortana, there's IBM started like Watson Assistant. There are a bunch of other smaller
But like
players
when
too.
you think voice assistants, you really only think like Alexa or the Google Home, maybe Siri. And like the idea is that like because these are all so popular, all these developers are making skills and apps and content only for the really popular ones. And then like all the other ones like essentially are just going to start fading away soon. Like I wouldn't be surprised if one of them just like dropped out and was like, we're not trying to do this anymore. But hey, you can use Alexa on our device now instead. Like it's just like, it's not a game worth playing for them anymore.
Yeah, one of the interesting examples is that Amazon did create a forked version of Android for its tablets, and it has its own app store where you can't really get the exact versions of Google apps because Google doesn't let you use them. And it also, if I remember correctly, provided that forked version of Android on the Fire Phone, which was short-lived and didn't really work out. But I guess ultimately it's really hard. Even like a version of Android, like a significantly different version of Android, it's hard to really build up enough market share to make it worthwhile.
Are you saying forked just as like a self-censorship kind of way, or
forked? No. Forked is a specific thing.
Oh, so it's actually forked. Okay.
Yeah. They like significantly changed it enough that Google's like suite of apps, like they decided that they like Google wasn't going to work.
Yeah, that's a big reason
like
why I didn't
directly
get
on
it.
them.
It's like I almost bought one for like $20 and I'm just like, I can't get any Android apps on this. This is pretty much useless.
You can get Android apps on them, but like they're like through weird like third-party stuff or whatever. Like the Amazon App Store is a little bit weird in that way because they forked it away from. I'm just gonna keep saying forked. Anyway.
I'm really looking forward to the day that Apple shows their true colors when like they realize that Siri isn't really all it was made up to be, and they've become kind of bottom of the barrel as far as the voice assistants goes. And they turn into that bratty kid on the playground who's like, I didn't want to play anyway. Voice assistants are stupid.
Nah, I mean, they were kind of first with like the voice assistant stuff.
It's true, but they're weak compared to the Echo and the Google Home.
Yeah,
You're
but
both right.
I think they're aware of that, though, that for them, it's more just like we don't want to collect data on people. And like we think our voice assistant can work fine without being able to collect data on you. Because like I really only use mine to like set a timer or like an alarm as opposed to, you know,
Buy things
help
for
me buy like 8 rolls of toilet paper or something like that. That's like I can just type that.
All right, just let me dream. I think it'd be funny if one of the tech giants turned into a spoiled brat and said, "We didn't want to do this anyway." That's what my official prediction. It's coming in the next 5 years. Mark it down, okay? We're out of time. I think we need to get Cats back in here sometime soon. We've got more than a handful of people in the chat, from Raheel to Bobby, who want to hear about home theater stuff, and
cool.
Roku wireless speakers, which I didn't even know were coming. So yeah, we got to get David Katz back on the show soon.
Are you talking about the Roku smart speakers that they announced a few days ago?
I believe so.
Yeah.
That could be a good excuse to bring Cats on.
Yeah, I'll pull him out of the basement. We haven't fed him in a bit, so I don't know if he's okay.
We just got to plug him back
either way,
in.
So there was a ton of news today, but if it's a little bit slower tomorrow, maybe we'll try to get Cats on, or I don't know, sometime
Last
next
time
week.
I tried getting him on, he had pink eye.
Gross.
So maybe I'll give it to him again.
Ew, what the hell, man?
Katz is a fan favorite. We should just get him on more often in general.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Anyways, take it home.
All right. Well, thanks for listening again. If you liked what you heard, the 359 podcast is also available on TuneIn, Stitcher, FeedBurner, Google Play Music, Google Podcasts, the Amazon Echo / Alexa. Am I forgetting anything?
No.
CNET.com.
CNET.com.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you tomorrow, I guess.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening.
Later.
No.